In C, let's see, we have x squared plus x over 3 equals 1/6. Well, most students really dislike fractions, so I'd say let's get rid of those before we do anything. How can we get rid of all the fractions in one fell swoop? Well, we can multiply everything by a factor of 6. Let's see what that'll do for me. On this first term, that will give me a 6x squared. However, on this second term, I'll have a 6 over 3. Well, 6 divided by 3 is a 2x equals, and on this last one, we'll end up with a 6 times 1, which is 6 on top. Divided by the 6 on the bottom will give us just a regular 1. Now again, this is a quadratic equation, but it doesn't equal 0, so I can't do anything, factoring or the quadratic formula, until it equals 0. So I need to move that 1 by subtracting 1 on both sides of the equation. Now what does that give me? That gives me 6x squared plus 2x minus 1 now equals 0. And that tells me my a is, the first number out in front of the x squared term, is 6. My b is whatever's in front of the x term, which is a positive 2. And my c term is whatever's at the end by itself with no x's, which is the negative 1, so c is negative 1. Now, does this factor? If you were to try AC method, you'd do a 6 times a negative 1, which is negative 6. And there's no two factors of negative 6 that would add up to the positive 2 in the middle, so no, it does not factor, and you would be stuck with the quadratic formula, which is x equals, as a reminder, it is x equals negative b. Let's see, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So the first thing we'd start off by plugging in is the negative b. Remember that b that we had for this one was 2. So we'd actually have a negative 2 plus or minus the square root of, remember that again, b was 2. So for this, we'd have a 2 squared, which is 4, minus your 4 times your a, which we said a was 6, times your c. Let's see, our c was negative 1. So we'll replace our c here with a negative 1. And on the bottom, we've got 2 times, again, what's on the bottom is another a. And remember, our a was 6. So we've got a negative 2 plus or minus. Let's see what we can simplify next. That's underneath the square root. So let's see. First thing that we want to simplify is any multiplication. And we have a 4 times 6 times a negative 1, which will actually give us a 24. The 4 that was out in front will stay the same. The question is that 24 positive or negative? And it's going to be a positive because we have a negative and a negative, which will cancel out, making a plus or a positive. Then on the bottom, we just have the 2 times 6, which is 12, so we can go ahead and take care of that. We're getting there. We can simplify what's underneath the square root. We can go ahead and add or subtract normally. In this case, we're going to be adding. Well, what do we have underneath that square root? We have a 4 plus a 24, which will give us 28. And again, we have the 12 on the bottom. Again, we cannot reduce this one yet because There's nothing out in front of that square root of 28 that can be reduced. Remember, there's a hidden 1 out in front, which means we don't have a common factor between everything. But let's see if we can break down the 28, which indeed we can. 28 is 7 times 4. So if we leave the -2, the plus or minus, and the 12 on the bottom, we can take the square root of the 4, which is 2, and we'll leave the 7 inside the square root because we can't take the square root of the 7. It's going to have to stay inside. However, if we zoom out now, notice that all 3 pieces are -2, 2, and 12 are all divisible by 2, which means we can reduce it by dividing out a factor of 2 from each and every piece. Let's see what that will do for us. So, dividing out the common factor of 2 will turn that -2 into a -1. Plus or minus, let's see. The 2 will go into 2 once. And we'll still have that square root of 7. Remember that square root of 7 is safe. We're not going to pass that barrier. And on the bottom, we'll have that 2 goes into 12 6 times. The only part of this puzzle that we do not have to write is that 1 that's in front of the square root of 7. So if I leave that out, it will remain as -1 plus or minus the square root of 7 over 6. Remember, that does give us 2 different answers. The one with the plus sign, reading with the plus sign, will give us the answer -1 plus square root of 7 over 6. And if we read it all over again, but with the minus sign, we'll get the second answer, which is -1 minus the square root of 7 all over 6. Those are our 2 solutions. Just like the last 2 solutions that we got, these are considered to be 2 things. They're considered to be irrational, and they're also considered to be real numbers. The reason why they are irrational is because both solutions have a square root of 7 in them that cannot be simplified out in any way. They're both real numbers because the final answers do not contain any i's. Continuing along, we've already done C.